The front axle of this Caterpillar loader has started leaking oil due to frequent overloading. After being diagnosed by Pakistani mechanics, it was found that the axle oil seal was leaking. However, because the loader's front axle structure is unique, using an integrated axle, they had to disassemble the entire front axle to replace the oil seal. To save time, they first needed to remove the bolt securing the front axle after removing the tires on both sides. Then, by controlling the loader's boom, they lowered the front axle to its lowest point. Once the bolts holding the front axle were removed, they could easily disassemble the heavy axle from the loader. With wooden blocks in place under the loader, they could begin disassembling the front axle. Even though they didn't have high-end power wrenches, since they had already removed the lower securing bolts in advance, the front axle disassembly went quickly. Soon, they had one side of the axle housing removed. Given the complexity of the task, they also needed to disassemble the axle housing on the other side. They first needed to disassemble the small half shaft inside the axle housing and the planetary gears to remove the half shaft. After removing the bearing lock nuts and bearings from the half shaft, they could pull the half shaft out. Judging from the condition of the half shaft flange, the oil seal had been leaking for a long time, as it was worn smooth and shiny, and the cavity was filled with debris. After removing the old oil seal, they installed the new seal. There wasn't a specific tool for installing the oil seal, so they gently pried it into place using a screwdriver. Once the oil seal was positioned correctly, they reinserted the half shaft into the axle housing. Next, they tapped the bearings into place with a small hammer. After tightening the lock nuts, they reassembled the axle housing. They first installed the planetary gears, followed by the small half shaft, the wet brake discs, and the brake pressure plate. They applied a sealant layer at the joints to prevent further oil leaks. Once the sealant was applied, they reassembled the axle housing. Since they had plenty of hands available, the oil seal on the other side was also replaced, and they quickly reassembled the axle housing. The axle housing bolts were fastened efficiently with the teamwork of the mechanics and workers. Now, they could reinstall the front axle on the loader. By lowering the boom and adjusting the position of the front axle, the bolt holes between the front axle and loader were quickly aligned, and they secured the front axle bolts. Although they didn't have high-end power wrenches, they pulled a ratchet wrench. With coordinated effort, they quickly tightened the front axle bolts. Finally, they reinstalled the tires on both sides. Even though they didn't have a sizable pneumatic wrench, the young mechanics' efforts quickly installed the 20-some bolts. The loader could now be started for testing. After multiple walking tests and boom tests, it was fully repaired. How many rupees do you think this repair should cost?